best out of your life is a good thing. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Andrew Michaels, and I'm joining you today to describe a lucid dream I had that I'm afraid may affect society in the near future. In this dream, I was not myself. In this dream, I was the character. Dr. Andrew Michaels. I was myself, Dr. Andrew Michaels. I know it's confusing, but I wasn't me, I was a character. And I was drawn to a townhouse apartment by a man who appeared to have a less than average intelligence. He said he needed me to help with a relative that needed medical attention. He said they were in trouble and he needed my opinion if they needed to go to the hospital. I told him I wasn't a doctor. I was strictly a research scientist doctor, not a medical doctor. But he insisted that I come to the apartment and check out the relative. When he got me inside the apartment, there was a foyer and then a living space. And in the living space were several large tube type televisions playing a tape over and over again. And the tape was the movie Split. Split was a horror movie recently made by M. Night Shyamalan, a wonderful director. He does horror movies. And they had the movie Split playing on continuous loop. And on the floor of the room were three babies. Three very small, sickly looking infants. One could barely move his head. He was laying on the floor, and two were sitting. And they all looked like they were, for lack of a better word, they all looked like they were weak, sickly children. They didn't look healthy at all. And when I approached the children and asked why they were unattended, as I turned, I realized the person had just stuck a hypodermic needle in the back of my arm. That was how the dream started. I was captured. I was tricked and captured. Now, I'm going to tell you the rest of the story. Okay. Now, M. Night Shyamalan made a movie didn't do very well at the box office. It was called Lady in the Water, and he actually played a big part in that movie. He had a decent-sized role that he had wrote himself as an undiscovered writer, and that this undiscovered writer, the words that he put down on paper were going to affect society, change society. But because he dared change the way society worked, changed society's norms, changed the way society looked at things, he became a marked man, marked for death. Those who couldn't accept the changes that his writing and teachings of his books taught found themselves marginalized in their own minds, and they sought to destroy him. And they did. In the future, he realized his character would be assassinated for what he had taught people, for the Pandora's box that he had opened on society. And I know people thought M. Night was full of himself, grandiose young man, writing that his teachings and his writings and his creativity would change the world, and not only change the world, influence the world, make it a different place. And people mocked him, mocked his movies. It's amazing, isn't it? How you discover things. Neat too. That's why I got 2 of them. Well, in my lucid dream about these sickly children, this man captured me. My mind racing at the speed of thought. Realized this man needed me because he needed someone to perform medical treatments on these children, and he couldn't have a doctor do it, a doctor that would come up missing. He needed someone that could disappear, who had disappeared from society, like me and this lowly janitor from my office building knew that when Dr. Andrews comes up missing, don't panic. He'll turn up. He always does. And no one would come looking for me. He knew I had medic training in the war, and I was perfect to help with the medical treatment of these sickly children. I came to nauseous. He had overdosed me because I'm a taller, larger man. He missed the dosage of the tranquilizer. He made me very, very ill. I could barely breathe. He almost stopped my heart. And I was very nauseous. I had realized I had thrown up, but luckily I was laying on my side. I was on the kitchen floor. I must have stumbled away from him in the living area and landed in the kitchen, or he might have drugged me there. But I realized quickly as I looked around the room with my vision very blurred and my eyes soaking wet and numb that he had put Vaseline over my eyes. I could barely make out some figures looking at me from a distance. I wiped my eyes as best I could with my shirt sleeve, and I could make out that those babies were in the other room. There were Cheerios on the floor. They dumped food on the floor like they were feeding not even dogs this way. It was a weird thing. Maybe they had spilled it. The children weren't making any noise, just staring at me. It had appeared, though, that the one who couldn't sit up was pulled or crawled into a position where he could see me with his head laid to the side. It was a weird situation, and I didn't understand it. But I was alone with these children, and that's when I realized I was manacled. My feet were anchored to the wall by manacles. I was chained up like an animal, both my legs. And there were braces on my legs to keep them straight so I couldn't stand up. I couldn't get leverage. I was stuck, almost unable to do anything except sit up and pull myself along. And the range of motion was very short. Enough room to get to a bucket in the corner, which was obviously set there for my waste materials, and just enough to get onto the carpet to observe and get to the 3 toddlers. But I was alone. The TV's playing very loud, and that's when I noticed there was soundproofing on the walls and windows. I didn't even bother screaming, though I thought I should. I was more afraid of throwing up, and my head hurt so bad that I thought if I yelled, I would pass out. And right now I had to take in as much information as I could from the room. I don't know how much time went by. I checked the children for temperature just by hand. I checked their eyes. I checked their throats and their skin condition. They were all in dirty diapers. They were not being well cared for or well maintained. I would ask them questions. They couldn't answer me, but they seemed like they would be old enough to vocalize or at least talk. Though they didn't appear they could stand, their legs were very weakly. They did look like they were old enough to possibly walk or even talk. My own children, well, my oldest, started talking around 1 or so. These children were close to 2.5, and clearly had been wearing diapers a very long time. They were thin and emaciated looking, white as ghosts. I don't think they'd ever seen the sun. Around midnight, and the movie Split kept rotating. I could kind of tell because there was darkness outside, and I assumed from the length of the movie and the intervals played that my jailer was on an afternoon shift. He had captured me before he went to his 3 to 11 shift, and it had taken him some time to get home with his groceries. It was around midnight, and I was guessing from what little crack sliver of darkness and streetlight I could see as he came in the door. A heavily insulated, soundproof door opened, and all I got was a glimpse of the outside. That was when I yelled. I yelled as loud as I could, hoping my voice would be carried outside for that split second to wake somebody up. He was furious. He dropped his bags immediately and slammed the door. He ran over to a cupboard on the far side of the living room and pulled out another injection. Unless you want to be comatose for the next 3 days, he said, I suggest you don't pull any more stunts like that. You don't want to disappoint the master. And when he said the master, I heard in my mind, only those with the mallets can stop the master. I was stunned. I heard something in my mind. Only those with the mallets can stop the master. The master was unseen, and in my mind was an image of that man standing there with that hypodermic needle in front of me. And I couldn't, for the life of me, figure out what in the hell was going on. Who is this person? Where did these kids come from? And he said, you'd better behave or you're not going to eat either. I can make things difficult for you, he said. He placed the hypodermic needle in a safe syringe holder and put it in his pocket. Basically, he was armed. As he pulled his jacket to put the needle away, I noticed he had a gun, a sidearm, and possibly a knife. He walked past me, out of length of my arms, to another room and unlocked the door. To my amazement, 3 women, also chained to the floor, came out. 3 young women in their 20s. And I looked at the children, and I looked at the mothers, and I said, okay, what the hell is going on here? Do you remember that man in Cleveland who kidnapped those 3 women. His name was Castro. He brought shame to his family. He kidnapped 3 young women, forced one of them to have a child for him. I don't think any human being has ever been charged with a higher amount of kidnapping and rape charges in modern society. Hundreds and hundreds of kidnapping and assault charges against him for a 10-year-long torture of 3 young women. He even had a child with one. The child called him father. Well, he was the father. Which begged me to ask the next question. Are you the father? And to that, the man turned, handing the grocery bags to the women, and said, no, they are the children of the master. And only the one with the mallets can stop the master. Dreams tend to take strange turns. This dream was not unlike any other. Time seemed to go forward and backward. I was kept drugged, and the only food that I was given was poisoned with some kind of chemical to make me sickly. And I was only giving watered down alcohol to drink to keep me weak and sickly while I inspected and treated the children. It seemed that they were not progressing, and they thought it was a physical condition and wanted a doctor's opinion, but they couldn't take them to a doctor. They couldn't even let them out of the house. And I was starting to figure out why. These children weren't normal. There was something about them. I could hear them speaking in my head. These children had voices, and they would try to talk to me. Their mouths didn't work, but their minds did. Their arms were weakly and frail, but their minds were sharp and fluid. They knew of the outside world. They wanted to see a car. They wanted to see a dog. They wanted to see a kitten. And their cries of torment kept me awake at night. I was exhausted. I was being tortured in my own mind, and they kept apologizing. They didn't mean to, but they had to get me to do it. And I said, what do you want me to do? Get me out of here. Get us out of here. Get our mothers out of here. The girls were forbidden to talk to me. They were victims, but the babies knew of their tortures. All 3 women captured. And if they were tortured, yes, if we capture the girls, we torture them. They produce offspring to us. The offspring will be superhuman. That was the master's plan. He had gotten the philosophy from watching the movie Split. And after a few years, he had produced offspring from 3 different women. Okay, that's the part. I keep telling myself, because I don't want you to hear it. Because I saw it. I don't want to talk about it. I just want to tell you, and I want to put it away. He didn't torture the girls. Yes, they were restrained. Yes, their food was monitored. They were sealed in a prison room. They were cuffed to the floor with manacles and chains. But they actually weren't tortured. In the movie Split, the tortured, the weak, and the broken are actually superior because they have risen past it to survive. They are advancing evolutionarily because they are able to overcome the physical tortures of life around them. The damaged are actually a higher being in the sense that they've evolved past the innocence of humanity, the sheepishness of humanity. And in this case, it produced a metahuman, a human with powers and abilities beyond a normal human being, a super being, a Superman. And the Master's plan was to produce a Superman, and not just any, but supermen. And these supermen would do his bidding. But he didn't torture the girls to produce them. He got them pregnant with his offspring. So there would be a connection to him. And rape is a torture. And as I said, manacled and strapped to a table is torture. But the true torture, the obscene torture, the ludicrous nature of the torture, the unspeakableness of it was he tortured the unborn children, tortured them to the point of death until he got it right. And these were the three that survived. These were the three he tortured that survived. He got the metahumans he wanted, but at a price. These kids were physically tortured, and it was more than I could bear. I couldn't put the images that the children in my mind showed me away. I couldn't make it go away. I couldn't turn it off. Do you understand what I'm saying? I couldn't turn off what had been done to them and just go about my business. And I grew more and more insane from it. And I asked, as I communicated more and more with them in my mind, who was this master? What did he look like? Where was he? And they couldn't tell me. They had never seen his face. They didn't know what he looked like. Well, I came up with a plan after a day or two of treating them for different medical conditions. Basically lying, except for their physical bodies being crippled and damaged. They were actually healthy. They could actually recover their physical bodies if they were put through some therapies and if they were given some surgeries to correct some damage done to them as infants. But I lied and said that they had some diseases and I needed some medications to make them better. I was basically buying time for my own life. I knew as soon as they were cured, I would be dead. So I even faked that one of them had a life-threatening fever. The whole reason for this was to try and say, look, you've got to quit with this. Give me some decent water and food to drink. I have to be as mind clear as possible to treat this child, or he's going to die. The women begged and pleaded that he listened, and he fed me only cereal that wasn't tainted and plain water, and it was enough to get my body's energies back just a little bit, clear my mind so that I had my balance. The whole time I was there, whenever I was alone, I was working on trying to get out of the braces on my legs. If I could stand up, even for 10 seconds, I would annihilate this man. My jailer would never see it coming. After the third day, my mind clear, I had just enough room in the leather straps around my hips to wiggle and slide out of the leg braces. They were around my ankles, and my legs were manacled, but I could at least bend my knees, flex my legs, get the energy and the blood flowing again, and I could stand up. So I went into the kitchen, hobbled in there, stood up, and I waited. All the cabinets were locked and shut. I didn't have a weapon. I didn't have anything to work with. And that's when I understood the term mallets. With your mallets, you can make him stop. The mallets can make it stop. And these were my mallets. To the babies, these were mallets. These were hammers. These were the hands of a righteous God through me and their jailer, the demon that needed to come to justice. And I waited. The trap was set. One of the babies threw up his food and laid beside it, looked comatose as he came in that night. His routine was to arm himself with the hypodermic needles. He saw the baby in distress, and I said, "Come quickly, I'm trying to get to the water so I can help the baby." He ran around the corner right into my arms. But he wasn't stupid. A man that I thought was an imbecile was actually quite intelligent and cunning. He had sensed a trap. How? I don't know. He had a needle in his arm, and he slammed it into me, immediately injecting me with a huge amount of tranquilizer. And in my mind, I heard 15 seconds. You have 15 seconds, 14 seconds, 13 seconds, and I grabbed him. I grabbed him by the neck, and I slammed his head once to the wall, catching the back of his head on the door jamb, the frame between the rooms, and I pulled him forward as hard as I could. 12 seconds, 11, stumbling backwards, feeling my stomach, feeling my legs start to quiver, my heart starting to race, all the adrenaline in my body, his head laying against my chest. I pulled him forward as hard as I could so that when I slammed him the second time against the door jamb, his head would snap back and hit very hard against the wall. My strength ebbing 9 seconds, his head split on the frame, blood splattering all over the wall. I fell to my own knees, and he ripped his clothes to get loose from me and stumbled forward and fell over the sink, almost out of my range. All I could grab was his pant leg. 8, 7, 6, I had 5 seconds. Somehow, with all the energy in my body, I reached up and grabbed him by his waistband, his hand on the back of his head where he was bleeding. He was screaming now, screaming as 4-3, his head laying on the edge of the sink. I balled up and stood with all my might, my fists, 2-1, and I slammed with all my weight down, and I cracked his head against the stainless steel sink. I cracked his head as hard as I could, and I collapsed. The women had somehow got out of the room. The babies were sitting in the kitchen with me. The girls using belts that they use for their clothing had somehow looped my leg and pulled me into the living room out of the kitchen. Our jailer was having convulsions. They said he had been laying there convulsing for hours after he had regained consciousness. I had cracked his skull. His brain was swelling. He was dying. He was dying a horrible death. his eyes wide open, looking at me, looking at them. The babies, they never took their eyes off of him. They just sat there and watched him. They weren't happy. They weren't disappointed. But they were curious. Is this what death looks like? And to think he's the first one we'll see die this way. Die at the hands of mallets. What would it be like, they thought, for the master? What would it be like to see the master die? The girls had pulled the broken hypodermic needle from my shoulder using a pair of tweezers that they kept for self-grooming. I told them I'd have to have it x-rayed. They said you were lucky he only got about half the injection in you, or he would have killed you. He would have stopped your heart. He had done that before with people who had broken in or accidentally somehow gotten the apartment. I really didn't know what to do next, but they said that he's coming now. The master's coming. Now that we've done this to him, the master's coming. I must have been out for at least hours. They had managed to get the leg braces off my body and had worked the lock on one of the manacles. I was down to one. All they wanted me to do was get them out of that apartment. Get the police. Get someone to help, because if he comes here, he's going to kill us. He's going to gas all of us. And they pointed to the fire suppression system on the ceiling and said that those aren't sprinklers. Those are gas valves. He will turn on the gas and kill us, and the experiment will be over. You've got to get us out of here. I guess they had a signaling system, and if anything went wrong, he would gas the whole room, and they would wake up, the whole room reset. They knew they only had a little bit more time, maybe an hour left, before it would happen again. And of course, that's when I notice there's cameras everywhere. He already knows what we've done, possibly. I've got to move. I've got to get moving. Why wouldn't he check the cameras? Because if he knew I was there, there would be even more reason to check. And that's when the door started to unlock. Now, to tell you more about a lucid dream, you have some control over yourself and your actions. In this one, I was paralyzed, mostly by fear and by graphic imagery. The graphic imagery of the dream kept me from reacting, kept me from doing what I normally do in a lucid dream and escaping or flying out of the room like in the Matrix. I was paralyzed. My body stuck. I was seeing something. This wasn't a normal lucid dream. I was seeing the future. I was seeing that someday somebody is going to do this. Somebody's going to take a lesson out of a book. They're going to build their own Ring-U, their own Saw, their own Split, their own Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'm sure it's already happened and we don't know. And I don't think it's M. Night Shyamalan's fault. He's just showing us the other side of the mirror. So don't blame him. I stood up and I wrapped a manacle that was loose and a chain around my left hand. I'd been gassed before in the military in my training. I knew how much time I had, and I knew what to do. The door opened just just as the manacle on my other leg fell loose. I charged the door. He stepped in, his gas mask already on, and the master reached over for the emergency switch, clicked it, and turned on the gas. He clicked that button about the same time my hand drove straight into his temple, cracking the glass in his World War I gas mask. I hit him so hard, the blood splattered from his nose up into the eyepieces of the gas mask. My other hand immediately shut off the gas. I told all the girls, hold your breath, and I kicked open the door. Hold your breath while I deal with this. My arm came back, and I hit him as hard as I could in the stomach and bowled him over. My other arm grabbed him in a headlock, and with all my force, all my weight, I went right out on top of him in the hallway. We landed with a huge thud as his ass hit the floor of the hallway. My hand firmly around his neck, all my weight coming down. I could feel his neck extend, and I snapped the life right out of him as we hit the floor. I pushed myself off of him and pushed him down, and with a furious, angry, evil, hateful kick, I kicked him as hard as I could in the face, his mask literally flying, the strap snapping, exposing who he was. To my horror, it was another janitor from where I worked. 2 janitors working in tandem, using the auspices of my department to cover up the horrors that they were creating in this office, using chemicals from the office and tools of torture from right where I work. I composed myself as best I could. I went back in, pulled the drawer of the cupboard by the door that was out of our reach all that time and found keys, knives, saws. Went back, unlocked and freed all the ladies. Blankets were gathered. Crying, tears, everyone crying, gathered up the babies. And as they were doing that, I ran back outside in the hallway to get the police. By then, neighbors had found the body, and they told me the police were on the way. I got other neighbors to help, and we pulled all the girls from the room. All they wanted to do was go out and sit on the sidewalk. All they wanted to do was see the sun. I didn't realize how badly that apartment smelled. I didn't even comprehend how badly that apartment smelled, because I had been in it and drugged and sick for 3 days. And the babies kept saying, on the 3rd day, he rose. On the 3rd day, freedom came. On the 3rd day, he left the tomb. On the 3rd day, we left the tomb. Inserting themselves into the story of the Christ child. The Christ child leaving the tomb after 3 days. After 3 days, he rose from the dead. They begged me to make sure that those 2 were dead. Kill the master. They just kept saying, kill him. I said, he's already dead. Kill him anyway. Make sure he's dead. It was the sickest thing I had ever dreamed. The imagery is beyond what I've described here. For the sake of civilization, the fear I have is beyond belief. To experience being a torture victim, to experience being a kidnap victim for days on end. To think of what Ariel Castro put those women through. And I used to say to myself, it was good. After a month in imprisonment, that's right, 1 month after Ariel Castro was incarcerated in prison, he committed suicide. As I sat on the sidewalk, as the EMS and the police showed up, the 3 ladies, the 3 babies, and the neighborhood all sat around observing, I thought about that. 1 month after being in prison, he incarcerated and he hung himself. And I thought to myself, that was 1 month too long. That was 1 month